The Porsche 908 screamed down the Mulsanne Straight at 240 miles per hour. Behind the wheel, Steve McQueen felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pure, absolute fear. Not fear of crashing. Fear that he'd finally found something he loved more than acting, and it might destroy everything he'd built. May 1970, Sebring International Raceway, Florida. Steve McQueen sat in the pit lane at 3 a.m, unable to sleep. In 6 hours, he would compete in the 12 hours of Sebring, one of the most grueling endurance races in the world. Not as a celebrity making an appearance, as an actual competitor. His co-driver, Peter Revson, found him there, staring at their Porsche 908. Nervous, Peter asked. Steve shook his head, terrified. Peter laughed. You're Steve McQueen. You've jumped motorcycles over barbed wire. You've done car chases at 100 miles an hour. What's there to be afraid of?
That's different, Steve said quietly. That was for the cameras. This is real. If I crash tomorrow, I don't get to do another take. And worse, he paused. What if I'm not good enough? What if I've been fooling myself all these years, thinking I'm a real racer?
Peter sat down beside him. Steve, you qualified in the top 15 against professional drivers, some of the best in the world. You're not fooling anyone. You belong here. But Steve wasn't convinced, because the truth was darker than Peter knew. Racing had become more than a hobby. It had become an addiction. And Steve was starting to realize that this addiction might cost him everything. His marriage, his career, maybe even his life. But what Steve didn't know was that the race tomorrow would force him to make an impossible choice. Earlier that week, Steve's agent, Freddie Fields, had called, furious. Steve, I just got off the phone with Warner Brothers. They're threatening to pull insurance on your next 3 films if you race at Sebring. Let them.
Steve, listen to me. This isn't a joke.
If you crash, if you get hurt, you could lose everything. $20 million in film contracts. Your entire career. Or, Steve said slowly, I could finally find out if I'm the man I think I am, or just an actor playing one. Freddie's voice went cold. Is that what this is about? Proving something? Maybe. Or maybe I'm tired of pretending. Tired of being Steve McQueen, the movie star, when all I really want to be is Steve McQueen, the racer. You can't be both. Why not? Because one of them is going to kill the other. And my bet, racing kills the actor. Then what? You're 40 years old, Steve. If racing doesn't work out, what's your backup plan? Steve had no answer, because he'd never thought that far ahead. Dawn broke over Sebring. The pits came alive with activity. Mechanics making final adjustments. Drivers suiting up. The smell of racing fuel and tire rubber. This was Steve's church. This was where he felt most alive. His wife, Allie, arrived just as he was pulling on his racing suit. She didn't say anything at first, just watched him prepare. Finally, she spoke. Freddie called me. I figured he would. He said Warner Brothers is threatening to cancel your contracts. They're bluffing. Are they? Ali moved closer. Steve, look at me. Is this worth it? Is 6 hours in a race car worth risking everything we've built? Steve met her eyes. It's 12 hours, and yes, it is. Why? Help me understand. You have everything. Success, money, fame. Why risk it all for this? Steve finished zipping his suit, because when I'm in that car, I'm not Steve McQueen, the actor. I'm not Steve McQueen, the brand or the image or the Hollywood commodity. I'm just me, a driver, fighting against time and physics and 50 other drivers who want to beat me. It's pure. It's honest. It's real. And our marriage? Ali asked quietly. Is that real? The question hung in the air between them. Steve wanted to say yes, wanted to promise her that racing wouldn't come between them, but they both knew it already had. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change their relationship forever. Before Steve could answer, the PA system crackled to life. Drivers to your cars. 15 minutes to start. Ollie's eyes filled with tears. You're choosing the race. I'm not choosing anything. I'm just... You're choosing, Steve, right now. You're choosing that car over me, over us. Steve reached for her, but Allie stepped back. Win your race, she said, her voice breaking. I hope it's worth it. She turned and walked away. Steve watched her go, every instinct screaming at him to follow, to fix this, to choose her. But his feet wouldn't move, because she was right. He was choosing the race. Peter appeared at his elbow. Everything okay? No, Steve said honestly, but it's time to race. The traditional Le Mans start. Drivers on one side of the track, cars on the other. At the flag, they'd sprint across, jump in, and accelerate into racing chaos. Steve's heart hammered in his chest. This was it. Everything he'd trained for, everything he'd risked. The flag dropped. Steve sprinted, reached his Porsche, jumped in. Key in ignition. Engine roaring to life. Other cars already moving around him. He slammed into gear and accelerated into the pack. The first corner came fast. Too fast. Cars jockeying for position. Steve held his line, muscled through on the inside. Someone touched his rear quarter panel. The Porsche twitched but held. He was through. For the next 3 hours, Steve drove like a man possessed, pushing the car to its limits, learning its rhythms, the way it behaved in the fast corners, the precise brake points, the optimal racing line. This wasn't acting. This wasn't pretending to be a racer. This was actually racing. Peter took over for the second stint. Steve climbed out of the car, drenched in sweat, hands shaking from adrenaline. One of the crew handed him water. How's it feel? The crew chief asked. Like finally coming home, Steve said. But home was about to become very dangerous. Hour 6, Steve's second stint. The sun was high now, the track temperature brutal. Steve could feel the heat through his suit, through the seat. The Porsche's handling had changed. The tires were wearing. The brakes felt soft, but he pushed on. Then, going into the hairpin at the end of the long straight, the brakes failed. Not completely, just enough. Steve mashed the pedal. The car slowed, but not enough. The corner was coming too fast. Other cars all around him. No room for error. Time slowed. Steve's racing instincts took over. He couldn't brake in time for the racing line, so he took a different line, wider, faster, more dangerous, onto the marbles, the loose rubber and dirt at the track's edge. The Porsche slid. Steve countersteered, fought the wheel. The car teetered on the edge of control. Then he was through. Somehow, the car still on track, still moving, still racing. His radio crackled. Peter's voice, urgent. Steve, you okay? We saw that moment. Steve keyed the mic. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold the steering wheel. I'm okay, but we have a brake problem. Box this lap. We'll fix it. Negative. I'm staying out. Steve, if the brakes fail completely, I said I'm staying out. Because in that moment, Steve realized something. This was what he'd been searching for his whole life. Not safety, not security, but this, the absolute edge between control and chaos, where every decision mattered, where there was no director to call cut, no stunt coordinator to catch him. Just him and the machine and the consequence of every choice. Hour 9. The Porsche was holding together, barely. The brakes were degrading with every lap. Steve's arms ached from fighting the wheel. His vision blurred from exhaustion and heat. But they were running in 8th place. 8th out of 60 starters. If they could just hold on for 3 more hours, then the radio crackled again. But this time, it wasn't Peter. It was Freddie Fields. Steve, I'm in the pits with your team. Warner Brothers lawyers are here. They're serious, Steve. If you don't withdraw from this race right now, they're canceling every contract. $20 million. Gone. Steve didn't respond. Just kept driving. Steve, did you hear me? $20 million. I heard you. And I'm racing. Silence. Then Freddie's voice, defeated. You're throwing away your career. No, Steve said, negotiating a tricky chicane. I'm finding it. But the real test was still ahead. Hour 10. Steve's final stint. He was beyond exhausted now. Beyond pain. Running on pure adrenaline and stubbornness. The Porsche felt like an extension of his body. Every vibration, every sound, every response telling him something about the car's condition. They dropped to 10th place. 2 cars had passed them while Steve was in the pits, but 10th was still extraordinary, still a finish to be proud of. Then he saw it in his mirrors. A Ferrari closing fast. The driver was pushing hard, desperate to make up positions before the finish. Steve watched the Ferrari come closer, lap after lap, gaining, getting ready to pass. Steve had a choice. Let the Ferrari by, preserve the car, guarantee the 10th place finish, or fight. Risk everything for one more position. Every logical part of his brain said let him by. But Steve McQueen had never been logical. When the Ferrari made its move going into the fast right-hander, Steve defended, held his line, the 2 cars inches apart at 180 miles per hour. The Ferrari driver was good, tried the inside. Steve shut the door, tried the outside. Steve moved over. For 3 laps they battled, neither giving an inch, the crowd on their feet. This was racing at its purest, 2 drivers, 2 machines, 1 winner. Then Steve saw his opportunity. The Ferrari driver made a tiny mistake, braked a fraction too early for the hairpin. Steve dove inside. They were side by side through the corner. Steve on the inside line, the Ferrari on the outside, both cars sliding, both drivers at the absolute limit. Steve came out ahead. He held that position for the final hour. When the checkered flag fell, Steve McQueen crossed the line in 9th place. Not a podium, not a win, but a finish. Against professional drivers. In one of the world's toughest races. In the pits after the race, Steve climbed out of the Porsche on shaking legs. His crew surrounded him, celebrating. Peter grabbed him in a bear hug.
You magnificent bastard. You did it.
But Steve was looking past the celebration to where Freddie Fields stood with 2 men in suits, Warner Brothers lawyers. Steve walked over, dirty, exhausted, victorious. Mr. McQueen, one of the lawyers, began. We're here to inform you that Warner Brothers is terminating. I know, Steve interrupted. $20 million in contracts. Gone, I heard. Do you understand what you've done? Steve looked back at the Porsche, at the track, at the life he'd just chosen. Yeah, I understand. I chose to be who I really am instead of who you wanted me to be. That's a very expensive choice. Worth every penny. But the real cost was something no one expected. Steve found Allie in the parking lot, packing her bags into a rental car. Ollie, wait. She turned. Her eyes were red from crying. Congratulations on your race. Ollie, please, let's talk about this. What's there to talk about, Steve? You made your choice. You chose racing over everything. Over me. Over your career. Over any kind of normal life. It's not that simple, isn't it? Allie's voice rose. You just threw away $20 million to drive in circles for 12 hours. How is that complicated? Steve stepped closer. Because for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Can you understand that? No, Ollie said quietly. I can't, because I thought you were meant to be with me, but I was wrong. You're meant to be with that car, with that track, with this obsession that's going to kill you. Ali, I'm leaving, Steve. I'm going back to L.A., and I'm filing for divorce. The words hit Steve like a physical blow. Don't, please. We can work this out.
How?
You want me to stand by while you risk your life racing, while you throw away your career, while you choose speed over everything else? She shook her head. I can't do it, Steve. I love you, but I can't watch you destroy yourself. She got in the car, started the engine. Steve stood there, watching her drive away. He'd won his race, but he'd lost everything else. 3 months later, Steve sat in his Malibu beach house, alone. The divorce was final. Warner Brothers had indeed canceled his contracts. Other studios, hearing about his recklessness, were hesitant to work with him. His agent had stopped calling. But on the mantel sat a trophy. 9th place. Sebring, 12 hours. 1970. His business manager, Bill Maher, came by to discuss finances. Steve, we need to talk about your cash flow situation. Without those Warner contracts, and with the divorce settlement to Ali, you're going to need to work soon. I know. There are some offers. Television, smaller films. Nothing like what you were getting before, but I'm not interested in smaller films, Bill. Then what are you interested in? Steve looked out at the ocean. Racing. I'm interested in racing. Bill sighed. Steve, you can't make a living as a racer. Not at your level. Not at your age. Maybe not, but I can make films about racing. On my terms. You tried that. Le Mans barely broke even. Le Mans was honest. It was real, and it meant something. To who? A handful of racing enthusiasts. Steve, you need to think practically. But then came a phone call that would change everything. The phone rang. Bill answered, then handed it to Steve. It's John Sturges. John Sturges, director of The Great Escape. A man who understood Steve like few others did.
John.
Steve, I heard about Sebring. 9th place. Hell of a drive. Thanks. I also heard you threw away $20 million to do it. Word travels fast. Steve, I'm calling because I have a project. An adaptation of Papillon. It's a tough film. A character study. A man in prison fighting for his freedom. Sound familiar? Steve sat up straighter. I'm listening. The thing is, the studio wants a bankable star, and right now you're seen as a risk. But I told them something. I told them that the Steve McQueen who would throw away $20 million to race at Sebring is exactly the Steve McQueen who can play Papillon, because both require the same thing, absolute commitment to being free. Steve felt something stir inside him. Hope, purpose. What's the offer? $3 million. Back-end points. And complete trust in your commitment to the role. No insurance restrictions on your personal life. You want to race on weekends? Race. You want to ride motorcycles? Ride. They just want you to show up and be Steve McQueen. The real one. The one who chose Sebring. When do we start? John laughed. That's my Steve. I'll have the script sent over. Papillon began filming in 1972, and it was everything John promised. A brutal, honest film about a man fighting for freedom. Steve poured everything into it. All his anger, all his pain, all his understanding of what it meant to be caged. During a break in filming, Steve gave an interview to a young journalist who asked him about Sebring. Do you regret it? Losing those contracts? Steve thought for a long moment. You know, everyone asks me that. Do I regret choosing racing over $20 million? And the honest answer is no, because that race taught me something essential. What's that? That you can't buy authenticity. You can't fake passion, and you can't compromise on who you really are. Those contracts wanted me to be safe. Steve McQueen, predictable Steve McQueen. The one who would never risk anything real. But that's not who I am. I'm the guy who needs to know what it feels like to push a race car to its limit, to feel that fear, to overcome it, to be real. Even if it costs you everything, especially if it costs me everything. Because what's the alternative? A safe, comfortable, fake life? No thanks. I'd rather have one real moment than a lifetime of pretending. Years later, the truth about that day would inspire millions. Papillon was released in 1973 to massive critical and commercial success. Steve's performance was hailed as one of his finest. The film made over $50 million worldwide. Steve's career, which everyone said was over, was back bigger than ever. But more importantly, Steve's choice at Sebring became legendary. Stories spread through Hollywood about the actor who chose passion over profit, who valued authenticity over security, who would rather be real than rich. Young actors started citing Steve as an inspiration, not because of his film roles, but because of Sebring, because he'd shown that you could be successful without selling your soul. In 1975, Steve was asked to speak at a film school. He rarely did public appearances, but this time he agreed. A student asked him for career advice. Steve smiled. Here's what I'll tell you. At some point in your career, you're going to face a choice. Safety or truth. Money or authenticity. The easy path or the real one. And when that moment comes, remember Sebring. Remember that the things that cost you the most often give you back the most. But you lost $20 million, the student said. No, Steve corrected. I invested $20 million in knowing who I really was. Best investment I ever made. 1980. Steve McQueen's final year. Cancer was taking him. Slowly but inevitably, in his final months he asked for something specific. Videos of his races, not his films. His races. His son Chad sat with him, watching footage of Sebring 1970. You never talk about your films much, Chad observed, but you talk about the races all the time. Steve smiled weakly. The films were my job. The races were my truth. Do you wish you'd raced more, made fewer films? No. I wish I'd been more honest earlier. Wish I'd stopped trying to be what everyone else wanted and just been myself from the start. But Sebring taught me. Better late than never. On the screen, young Steve McQueen battled that Ferrari, 2 cars, 1 track, pure competition. You know what that moment was? Steve said, pointing at the screen. That was me refusing to let someone pass me. Fighting for 9th place. Not for money. Not for fame. Just because I couldn't let him win. That's who I really am. That's what I want people to remember. They will, Dad. They will. The Porsche 908 screamed down the Mulsanne Straight at 240 miles per hour. Behind the wheel, Steve McQueen made a choice. Not between racing and acting. Between authentic and fake. Between loving his truth and living someone else's version of his life.
He chose truth. It cost him $20 million. It cost him his marriage. It cost him the easy path.
But it gave him himself. 40 years later, people still talk about Steve McQueen, the actor. But the ones who really understand him talk about Steve McQueen, the racer. The man who chose passion over profit. Authenticity over compromise. Real over fake. The race at Sebring wasn't about winning. It was about being willing to lose everything for the chance to be real. And in the end, that's the only victory that matters. You have a Sebring moment coming in your life. A choice between safe and real, between what others expect and who you really are, between the money and the truth. Steve McQueen faced that choice on a racetrack in Florida. He chose real, and yes, it cost him. But it also gave him something no amount of money could buy, the absolute certainty that he lived his life on his own terms. What's your Sebring? And when it comes, what will you choose? The safe path is always there. It pays well. It's comfortable. Everyone will understand. But the real path, the one that terrifies you, the one that might cost you everything, that's where you'll find out who you really are. Steve McQueen found out at 240 miles per hour. Where will you find out?